And let me double check on this. Okay, good. Anyway, just double checking so I don't mess up the recording. Bottom line, art in the Stone Age. And what I really will hopefully will get out of this is that you'll see some of the more notable artworks from the Stone Age. We call it prehistory too. And that kind of brings up a question. What is prehistory? It's like when you're going for your SAT, you take prehistory, like pre-law, something. Pre-med, prehistory. No, prehistory is something quite different. What it is that history itself is pretty much dependent on recording. And so there's really two ways that history has been kept over the millennia. And the first one is oral history. And what's required for oral history is that you have to have a historian in your group of people. And so a lot of people who have been practicing culture a more traditional way would have an oral historian. That would be the person's job in this group of people, in this society, in this clan, in this tribe, if you will. And so you can find them all over the place, but modern times, this is just something that's kind of went away. Colonialism, different kinds of things. Oral historians can provide a lot of good information, and historians who can find oral historians among people around the world, they know this is gold. You can trace the lineage back, because the other way to record is what? It's writing. And so most of the history we know of is written history. And occasionally we have this kind of intersection of prehistory and history. What do I mean by that? In the Old Testament, in the Bible, the old book, it's central to the major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It goes back that far. And in the early books, if you've read this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They'll put long passages in, like pages and pages of so-and-so married so-and-so, they begat so-and-so, these were their children, and they begat, they married, they begat. It's just a line, a lineage. If it were today, it would be ancestry.com. Bottom line is that that's a very good example of something that was probably kept by an oral historian. And when writing came along, it was put into writing. And not so much today, but starting next week on Tuesday, we'll start to see how that starts to come about and play into the culture. But right now, what we look at is prehistory, and all we can really do is guess based on the evidence of what life was like for these people. And so one of the best indicators of what life was like during these times is the artifacts and the art that they produced. And so this is a map, and this is kind of what we're talking about, at least the first part of this chapter. And Altamira, site of ancient caves. Lascaux, we have all of these places around the Pyrenees and southern France and the southern Alps. But Altamira and Lascaux are kind of the two more famous ones. I'll talk to you about why that might be. And then we have in this chapter some ancient sites from what we call the Middle East. And that would be in Israel, Palestine. We would see that in Jordan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, pretty much all through here. So we're not exactly sure that this is where artistic production began. And in fact, by the time we go through all of this, I'll show you some more recent discoveries, because bottom line, we're finding artistic production from all over the globe, all peoples, all cultures. And I got this. This is the Hall of Bulls, and this is from the cave in Lascaux, France. And for some reason, when I copied this down, it cut off part of it. My bad. But it's a wonderful picture. It's one of the earliest cave painting sites that we know of, partly because it was discovered like about 125 years ago or less. It's a recent discovery. And prior to this time, nobody really knew how far back ancient people had been producing works. And so this was kind of a big splash in the last century. And they found this is deep inside a cave, and they were astounded. And this whole chapter, this is, and what we'll see for a while, the intersection between archaeology and art. Because a lot of this art is uncovered by archaeologists. And they're looking for evidence of human existence and knowledge of how people lived. We're kind of focusing on the art part of it. But at any rate, this was astounding. And it changed a lot of ideas about ancient people around the globe. I want to add this little bit to what I'm saying here too. On some of these slides throughout the course, you're going to see a blue star on the PowerPoint. I put those blue stars there partly because these are some of the works that have gotten much of the attention and thereby much of the research. Much has been written about the caves at Lascaux. And so this may be a factor in when you decide to do your group presentation or something. Or I just want you to know that these are the iconic works. These are the ones that you'll see in virtually every art history book. Bottom line, it's changing. We're finding out more all of the time. But this is the Hall of Bulls at the cave at Lascaux, France. And I wanted to talk to you about this. But one of the debates around the cave art that we found is we've been trying to figure out this whole century plus what life was like for the people who produced these paintings and in some cases the sculpture that we find. Bottom line, we don't really know. And for many years, it was assumed that this is where the people lived, inside those caves, and they painted the bulls and all of the other stuff. Well, more recently, and one of my colleagues here is an archaeologist, and he and I talked about this. We talked about it. The bottom line is that it's his learned opinion that those places where you see those cave paintings, the people really didn't live in them, which kind of adds another question. Then why? Why would they go deep in the earth and find this place and paint these wonderful paintings, but they don't live there? Well, you know what I asked? I said, well, how do you know? He said, first of all, we're not finding any evidence or much evidence inside the caves of their tools, cooking, remnants, shards, little pieces of clothing or whatever. We're not finding that. Second is that we still hold, at least in terms of anthropology, study of humankind, that people of that era, 20,000, 30,000 years ago, were what we would still refer to as hunter-gatherers. Guys know what that means pretty much. I'm saying something good. Bottom line is that what people look at is if they can find some similarities to cultures that live the same way and see if they can provide any clues to what life might have been like 10, 15, 20, 30,000 years ago. And so there are certain places, I'm not going to give you all of them, but there are certain places around the world where people still, you can find people who still live in a traditional way. And I want you to think about this as we're looking at this. If it's not broke, there's no need to fix it. Necessity as the mother of invention. But if what you are doing works perfectly well, why mess with it? And so what you have here, this is in West Central Africa. And wait, I'm thinking this might be in East Africa. Anyway, bottom line, you see what they have here, and this is a dwelling. And this would be something that perhaps a hunter-gatherer from 10, 20,000 years ago might have lived like this. And it provides shelter, keeps the rain off. It's pretty fortified around there. And it's got a door. Because you might think that there are large predatory animals in this environment. And so, like the lion king, the lion sleeps tonight. Just say it. Bottom line is that you have to have protection from those animals that could pose a threat. And so this is something that works and has worked well for tens of thousands of years. And this is Polynesia. And you see this is a kind of a typical dwelling, building. Polynesia. Polynesia is this kind of blanket name for most of the islands in the Pacific and especially in the South Pacific Ocean. And their cultures from one island to the next are different. Samoa is different than Hawaii, etc. However, they're very similar too. And one of the things that happens in most of Polynesia is that there's not so many large wild animals. And so you don't need that fortification. And it's usually hot in those places. And so it's natural air conditioning. And so you can live in this, you can cook, feed your kids, you could raise a family here. And it works. And I was in Hawaii for a couple of years, and I learned about Hawaii, United States, part of Polynesia. Bottom line is that they had snakes over there. They do not have snakes any longer because colonists brought over the mongoose, and mongoose feed on snakes. Just say. Now they got mongoose running off. But anyway, but this works. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And likewise, we have, this is a couple of examples of dwellings from the plains people from North America. And this is adequate in how they live. We think, we're pretty sure they lived this way for tens of thousands of years, again. And what's going on here? Well, it's got some of the attributes of some of the other things that some dwellings we've seen, but it's pretty different in a lot of ways too, in that it's collapsible. You can fold this up and take it somewhere else. These people were hunter-gatherers as well, but many of these people depended on bison. It's a staple of their diet. But bison are nomadic. They travel. The herds go all over the place. And where they go, these people go. They fold it up and they hunt, settle somewhere else, etc. And you see it keeps the wind and the rain off. It's got an open top there so that you can stay inside and cook inside, which is kind of something we don't see with the other ones because the climate's warm. You can cook outside. Here, this is North America. You got to find some place to prepare your food out of the snow, out of the wind, out of the rain. So anyway, these are the kinds of things, these are the kinds of conditions that really weigh in on trying to assess what life was like in prehistoric times. And so this is painting bison at the cave at Altamira, Spain. And you see, as I was talking about the Native Americans, we see bison a lot in ancient cultures too. What we find here a lot of times is that they depict animals that are probably not still living in this particular region. And so we can kind of figure that Europe itself, 20,000, 13,000 years ago, probably had nomadic bison. And if so, they probably lived a lot more like our Native Americans here. And so that's kind of the logic underneath the argument that people really didn't live. So, question is, why did they do this? What purpose did it serve? I think you could make a pretty good case for a number of different reasons. When we were here on Tuesday, I was telling you about a central culture that's wrapped together, where religion and literature, poetry and music and dance and history and art and medicine, all of these things that are different disciplines in today's world, we're all kind of intermeshed. And so that might give us an insight to why these were painted. And it could be that they saw bison as deity. It could be there are cultures known to worship animals. You say, could be. It could be that they thought that if they were painting these, it would bring them good luck in the hunt. My other section yesterday, somebody came up with an idea, which I thought was really pretty good, that this might have been college. That this place was a sacred place, to be sure, because like I say, everything is kind of wrapped together. And it may be a place that people would take their young hunters and teach them about how to provide for the people. Okay, Junior, you got your spear. Hit them right there. Don't hit them over here, etc., etc. These are the animals that we hunt. This is how you do it. So, graduate school, 11,000 BC. Maybe, I don't know. There are some of these cave paintings that have little chips on the surface, as though spears had been thrown or projectiles of some kind have been thrown at. And that could support the idea that this is informational teaching. Or other people have come by and said, well, you know, it might have been that somebody new to this was exploring the cave, and they came into the room and they saw these huge bison and started throwing their spears at it because they were afraid. Yes.
Maybe it's a way to keep track of where the groups, like they paint the animals are.
Yes, that would fit perfectly. Yeah, absolutely. And they do differ from place to place. And we'll see some with the spotted horse and different kind of bison and so on. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll finish that thought about people being afraid of these. One of the aspects of this, and this kind of interesting food for thought. Bottom line, when ancient people went back into this room inside the cave, first of all, it was pretty far in. None of them are close to the entrance, which has kind of been helpful in preserving these paintings because they're not really permanent materials. In fact, some are just humidity could ruin this. But the lighting that one would have 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, would be a torch. And they say, and I've never done this, but they say when you go into these rooms with a torch, that these things look a lot more real. Because you're not like lighting it up with the overhead lights that we're kind of accustomed to. All you got is this kind of torch and the light is uneven and it's not that bright. And so maybe they got scared. And so all of this stuff that we're talking about is possible. We have no recorded history, and we don't know for sure. Which kind of brings me to another point. I'll bring it up now. It's going to come up a lot in this course, at least the first part of the course. When we have situations where we can't fully explain what it is, who did it, how they did it, that's a knowledge gap. And we know why we have a knowledge gap. There was no written history. These people did not tell us what they did or why they did it. We just have the stuff. But when you have that knowledge gap, that's a vacuum. And so a lot of times opportunistic people, all kinds of characters, will rush in to give an alternative explanation. And that becomes quite an issue, like when we get to ancient Egypt. And even though they had written history, we still don't know everything about the culture from 3,500 years ago. But there's a lot of people that'll tell you aliens came down and built the pyramids. In fact, they found a dagger, a knife, in King Tut's tomb, and it's made of a material that they still haven't figured out yet. Some kind of metallic substance, but they don't know what it is. E.T. So anyway, I'm just saying that in part because when you do look at this stuff, keep in mind that there is this big hole in the knowledge and that people are going to fill it up with whatever they got. And so anyway, this is a bison. There's a spotted horse there from Perchemel in France. And this is even older. See, this is 22,000 BCE. Got a question. What's BCE mean? BCE, because certain. Right, yeah, before it is. And this is another thing that you'll find when you're looking around. You'll still see the term BC, which means literally before Christ. But in scholarly circles, and it's becoming more accepted in this day and age, we look at it as before Common Era. And so that's what that means. It still means the same thing. We've adopted the European calendar that's based on Christianity. We haven't changed the years, but we're talking a little differently, speaking a little bit. Oh, no. Anyway, we're speaking a little differently about what these things are. So it's an way of being more inclusive and more accurate in a lot of ways. So before Common Era, and then when we talk about present day calendars, 2021, we would refer to that as CE, Common Era. You'll still find some places that say AD, which is from the Latin anno, year, like an annual thing. It's the same root word. Anno Domini, which means God. Or correctly, year of our Lord, Anno Domini. But we call it Common Era. Now, before Common Era, before the thunder. Well, I saw on my phone that they were talking about a slight chance of rain, but they said, yeah. Yeah, all you guys not from Missouri, how you liking it? This is like crazy. It is crazy for us too, yeah. Yeah, it's been extremely, yes. I'm sorry. Oh, no, please go ahead. Well, yeah, it wasn't supposed to be. It just said light rain.
Okay, question about the cave paintings today. Like
Yeah.
archaeologists, the cave paintings like very deep in the cave, or is there some like very deep and some of them like in the beginning?
Very deep, period.
And also another question, like during this time, was there like possibility of like people going at war with one another, like killing?
Yes.
I would think like they might have used the cave as like a safety measure, doing it in the back. So like people like back then were naturally afraid of the dark, so they wouldn't want to come in by themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good observation. I think that's in a lot of ways that's quite likely. You know, if you want to be left alone, go deep in the cave. Absolutely. If we get to this today, I got some links at the end of this PowerPoint from some actually mainstream magazines and stuff, National Geographic, The Guardian newspaper, Smithsonian. And there are, now that you brought this up, I just love talking about this. Bottom line is that some of this stuff goes back so far that we're trying to figure out exactly what kind of humanoid made these things. Because we know that modern human being, what's it, Homo sapiens, is that who we are? Okay, yeah, we can go with that. Bottom line is that there were other hominoids before that. And in this area, in Europe and in Asia, there was the Neanderthals, which is a pretty parts group, and the Denisovans, which are more from the eastern parts of Europe and Asia. That's two main groups that we know about. And so people are trying to figure out how does this get into all of these things that we're finding? Because today we're finding stuff that's much, much older than these things that are, 25, 28,000 years. And we're figuring out maybe this was a Neanderthal painting. And to your point about warring people, we're still trying to figure out why those Neanderthals and the Denisovans are not with us today. And we don't know. The common belief for many years was that they just killed each other off. It was a Darwinistic kind of thing. Finding that probably really didn't happen, because they're finding traces, if you're of European descent, they're finding traces of Neanderthal DNA. I got like 0.03% Neanderthal DNA. Whoa. So they think maybe these different kinds of humanoids, hominids, interbred instead of killing each other. But the ideas are still there. They were people. People fight. Yeah. But DNA is yet another tool that we're using in not only trying to figure out who we are, but who made this kind of stuff that they left us. So, on that note, I got to tell you that the research today in this last decade or so for archaeology and anthropology and all of these disciplines studying humankind, it's an explosion. Oh, right on time. Yeah. Bottom line is that with the part of the reason that this information base is growing exponentially is that first of all, there are a lot of people that think it's important to know these things. So they get money. We spend resources around the world. Governments, private organizations, NGOs, people are putting money into it. Secondly, we have so many more tools than we had 100 years ago. You're not just going around with a shovel, just digging in the ground and trying to find something that may or may not exist. DNA is a tool where we're trying to figure out information about things like this cave painting. But we got ground penetrating radar. They can put this thing on the ground. They can tell you if there's something underneath. Older technologies, metal detectors, very sensitive. They're really going at it. If you guys are interested in this kind of thing, I can tell you without a doubt, this would be a good career to consider. Actually, in my other section, I got a guy in there from Tunisia, and his mother and father are archaeologists, professional archaeologists. So they're finding stuff. And he was talking about having all of these old artifacts and things in his house. But anyway, it's a it's something that people are interested in. And it could be a great career. So anyway, sometimes I wanted to point this out with this painting, and you see it's pretty old, 23,000 BCE, our best estimate. But see, we have chemical analysis too. Carbon isotope analysis. We can figure out, pretty close how old it really is, especially since a lot of this stuff is done with charcoal, which is basically carbon. And so anyway, look at these hands, negative hand imprints. So how do you think that happened? Okay, run this one. Yeah, kind of close to that. Yeah. I think that the carbon belies the mud, but we think, at least the best guess here, is that they were tagging. They figured out they didn't have Krylon or anything, spray paint, but they did figure out the principle of aerosol. And we think that what they did was find hollow reeds, and they put together, probably in their mouths, chew up some charcoal and blow it through the reed and spray it, and basically this, creating a negative hand. So it's not unlike spray paint. That's the best explanation, and that fits right in with what you're saying. Put your hand up there and put the pigment on top. And so anyway, all of this suggests a level of sophistication. And the more we find out, the more impressive, at least in my mind, this is. One of the things that we do here too, we think that a lot of the earlier cave paintings are reasonably naturalistic. They seem naturalistic. We think they probably bear a pretty close resemblance to the animals, the natural fauna of the area. And so here's one, here's a running horse in the caves at Lascaux, 16,000 BCE. And this is kind of interesting. We don't really know, but sometimes we find bones, surviving skeletons of animals, and we don't know so much about this head, which is seen to be really small and not particularly naturalistic. But we do know the evolution of horses. And the early horses were real short. They had short legs. And we can find the skeletons to prove that. Horses were one of the early domesticated breeds of animal. And they pretty much did with horses the same thing that they did with dogs. Find wild dogs, and they're all kind of alike from around the world. Dingoes in Australia and so on. There's wild dogs from the Carolinas in North America. And they're all kind of the same. But from that genetic stock, we have Great Danes, we have Chihuahuas, we have Dachshunds, because those dogs were bred for those purposes, whatever. Do you know the Dachshunds were short leg and long because where they were bred, they used to hunt badgers. Badgers dig a hole and they live inside a hole in the ground, and to hunt them, they had to have a dog that could run in there and chase them out. Just saying. Labrador retrievers, they're not afraid of water. They'll go out and retrieve the ducks that you just saw. Anyway, horses, same way. Some are fast, some are strong, some have endurance that you could get on horseback and ride all day long. And so anyway, we think that a lot of this is probably pretty accurate. And this part, I don't know that we really know what that is, but that could be, and as you were saying about tribes and stuff and having, this may have been something of a marker, or this is us and this is our place. It could be an early form of written communication or some kind of early symbolism. We don't know, but anyway, woolly rhinoceros, wounded man, here's the wounded man, disemboweled bison, that's this right here. This is one that I already kind of got him and killed him and ate him. And so, talking about the idea that these things might be educational, maybe this is what you say to Junior. If you run into this woolly rhinoceros and you don't kill him, this is what you'll look like. Eat or be eaten. And so anyway, another French cave painting. This is more like a drawing. And what I often ask my students here is, if you were to grade this as part of a drawing class, how many of you are art majors, by the way? Oh, good, yeah. Usually I get a lot of you. What's the quality? What's the drawing quality here? F, A, somewhere in between.
It looks like a practice sheet. Practice to draw.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I'll give it a
D, B. Yeah. I could do that. Somebody, one of the answers I get from time to time is, and it's right along with what you were saying, looks like a sketchbook. And which is serving the same purpose as you're talking about, and you don't put your work in a sketchbook. But it shows a level of observational skills and hand-eye coordination, and you artists know exactly what that's about. That's how you make art. This is how you make representational art, is that you have to be able to see, you have to be very dexterous. One of the interesting parts of this piece is this. And so we got horses, small, bigger, and larger. Yes.
Stacked on top of another. The top one goes to the top. It's, it gets more in each.
Yeah. Well, I think you guys are talking about the same thing. It could be evolution over a long time, or it could be a growth chart. And when we grow, when we age, when we mature, that's an evolution too. Just, but these are, you guys are getting it. I love this. This is the kind of questions that are asked of prehistoric art. Why? What's the meaning? What skills did they have? Deer hunt. And again, was talking about naturalism a moment ago. And we see these figures. And this is a kind of interesting juxtaposition. That's an art word. That means you put two things side by side. But the deer seem to be, of course, this has been faded. It's deteriorated over time, but you can still see that this deer was handled in a more naturalistic way. It looks, quote, more real than does the figures that are hunting this deer. And so there are some things here that are kind of interesting that, you know, the gesture of this guy running or this person running and stuff. But these figures, I think we called them symbolic. Would you agree with that? And that idea of naturalism or symbolism, this is a question that we'll be looking for, we'll be asking pretty much through this whole course. And we'll have periods of time where there is high degrees of naturalism, other times high degrees of symbolism, and much of the time a mix, even in the same piece. Something about it is symbolic, some of it is natural. And so this is from Turkey, 6000 BCE, and and this is one of the oldest artifacts we have. And as I said, ancient art, global, wherever there were people, as far as we know, they were making art. This is from South Africa, and we think this is 3 million years old. And so this is a waterborne pebble resembling a human face, and it is a pebble, and it's not that big, 2 3/8 inches there. So we're seeing it much larger. But analysis, the experts pretty much agree that how this is. You got a question? Oh, you just stretch it. Okay. Try to stay on top. Bottom line, these marks, by all indication, look like they were made into the stone. Somebody carved this out somehow, as well as the mouth area, and possibly this, which gives you a hairline. That the odds of something like that happening, occurring naturally, pretty remote. And so 3 million years ago. And, I wanted to point out something else too. I'm going to show you this. This was found in South Africa. Look where it's at. The Natural History Museum in London. And what we look at for a long time here is going to be art that was made somewhere. Of course, the cave art has to stay in place, But when we start doing sculpture and other artifacts, we're gonna find that this stuff had been, want of a better word, looted from its original place. And so this is in the Natural History Museum in London. London's not in South Africa. I don't want to get too deep into that question, that issue right now, but it is something that you will find in the news in this day and age, because European colonialism, you'll find stuff from the Middle East that's at the natural, or at the Royal Museum in London, in Paris, and so on. Even in the United States, we have Egyptian mummies. You can go down and see it. So anyway, it's an issue. And part of that's why they put where you can find this, where you can see it if you want to do research. And this is a feline with human feet, and it's a drawing. It's charcoal on stone, and that's what I was talking about earlier. A lot of this stuff is made with charcoal. Kind of tells you two things. When you got charcoal, it probably means that you have discovered fire. And so that's how you get charcoal. You burn stuff, preferably plant, wood, stuff like that. Bottom line, 28,000 BCE, much older, twice as old as the caves in Lascaux. Tell you the story about this if you haven't read it. Namibia. South Africa, Southwest Africa. Bottom line, it's still there. That's a thing. It's called Apollo 11 cave because they discovered this during the time Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were walking on the moon in July 1969. So they named the cave after that. And it was kind of a momentous time, humankind showing up outside the earth and then finding this evidence of human creations from tens of thousands of years ago. You got a question? Okay, that's all right. So anyway, again, globally, we're finding artwork. This is, I put the star by this guy, Venus of Willendorf. What the heck is this about? It's only 4¼ inches high. What in the world? What would account for the body shape? You know, it's a female human figure. Got hands over the breast like this. You can see that. Nobody taking a guess? Got a star by it. It's like huge. It's something too that was found a long time ago. It was found in the Northern Alps in Australia. Austria. And I underlined limestone. And a lot of the early sculpture will be of soft material. Limestone is pretty soft rock. You can take another rock, harder rock, and kind of carve into it. It's not that hard. The other medium you'll find a lot of is ivory, woolly mammoth tusk. Ivory is a preferred medium. But this, I think you can talk about what was important to the culture when you first encounter a piece such as this. We know that all of the animals, the bison and the woolly rhinoceros and all of that other stuff, and we've seen it and kind of make some conclusions that that was about the hunt. Sustenance, hunting, important, gotta eat or be eaten. Survival of the people. What else is necessary for survival? Reproduction. Absolutely. That's what we think this is all about. It's about fertility. It's about reproduction. And aside from hunters being painted on the sides of caves, much of the ancient sculpture we find are of female figures. And the common accepted belief is that in ancient cultures, women were held in high esteem, and especially women who could reproduce, bear a lot of children, that could just, that's huge. And so this is kind of points that way. We think it's a fertility thing. We think it's about reproduction. We take a look at what's going on her head, and there's some kind of headdress on there. There are skeptics that say, "Wow, see, look, they just try to put bag over it." There are also people who believe that this headdress is actually a sign of status in the culture, much like a crown or something. And I tend to believe that that's true. Second thing is that this is something that was actually made. It looks like something that was woven or crocheted. It was valuable. And I think it does denote status. We see the exaggerated characteristics of the female body, large breast, heavy, etc. All points to reproduction. And so we think this was a fertility reference, reproduction, as you say. And we're still not sure about how much more we can add on to that. People have talked about this as something that you could carry with you, because it's only 4¼ inches. And it could be something that would be like a lucky charm if you wanted to have conception, successful conception. Maybe this factors into that. And like I say, religion, fertility, reproduction, it's all in your belief system. And so anyway, why would they call her Venus? Because they think she came from a different planet. Venus. The sun of the mountain, burning like a silver flame, goddess of beauty and love. I'm gonna keep singing until you guys come up with names. So, how about this? I'll tell you. Venus is what they called this object when it was found. And more than, or aside from, or rather than seeing this as a fertility object, they saw it as beauty. And it was on the old notion that all art was meant to portray beauty. Something that comes out of ancient Greece. It's never have been entirely true, but Plato, truth and beauty, one and the same. And so they named it after the Roman goddess of beauty, Venus. And so whenever they find a female figure, they automatically assumed it was about beauty, and these are all called Venus, almost all. And so anyway, we think this is something, has a lot to do with fertility. And here's the head of a woman from France, and this is, yeah, this is pretty old too, 25,000 BCE. And it's made from, as I was saying, woolly mammoth ivory, 1.5 inches. And this may be beauty, may be fertility, but for whatever reason, like I said earlier, most all of the human figures we find from ancient prehistory are women. And the other thing I might add is that this cross hatching that you see across the top seems to indicate that this represents status as well. Just like Venus of Willendorf, I'll go back, we saw this headdress. This may be a different form, but it shows, indicates something significant. If it wasn't significant, the artist would not have put it in. Woman holding a bison horn. This is 25,000 years ago. Another female figure, maybe likely fertility, reproduction, survival of the people. Looks a lot like Venus of Willendorf. It's she's got this bison horn, and that bison horns were used for a long, long time as vessels. So you wouldn't be drinking out of that steel. Is that a Yeti? Yeah. Wouldn't have that, not in ancient times. But you'd have a bison horn, and they were used for that way. The other part of it is this may indicate status. And again, a lot of indicators point that the status of women vitally important. And so it's painted limestone. Of course, the paint's been worn off. Second thing is that we know it had been painted because people can do microscopic analysis of the surface. You can see what color it was painted, we can see what it was painted with, even if it doesn't look like it's painted. And there's something about this, you'll see this on the side. Those numbers, did they invent mathematics 25,000 years ago? Nope. Yes.
Have historians ever considered why they painted like people and things like that? Did they
Well-
do it because they wanted to, or like was there?
Well, and I'm glad you asked that question, because that's why I've been asking these questions. Because these are all the same questions that historians, experts have been grappling with. There are people on many different sides based on regarding why they did what they did. We can figure out how for the most part. We can analyze the stone, the pigments, you know, stuff like that. We can kind of take a look at it, figure the techniques about blowing charcoal through a reed. We can figure that out, but we still don't absolutely know why. And so I think that in the discussion we had today, we hit the most probable reasons. And you guys were pretty good. You guys were thinking like the experts have about why these things are the way they are. There's you ever heard of Occam's razor? Sir, you shook your head yes. Tell everybody what that means.
That's the one that most likely solution is the one that has the solutions, right?
Right, yeah, the most likely answer is probably the right answer. And so, yeah. And so in terms of probability, in terms of a lot of things, it's like trust the obvious. And that's what we've been talking about. It's basically an Occam's razor issue. Razor, by the way, means a phrase. Anyway, an Occam is the value. And it's time. Wanted to tell you about these numbers on the side. And we see them over here. All I have to say about that is the reason they're there is that back in the day, when they found stuff, they mark it. Yeah, they don't do that anymore. But you can tell if something had been found like 50, 75 years ago. Yes.
Do we mark it on the date? It sounds like when they do mark it, they put down like when they found it or like.
No, they usually catalog, it depends on who found it, but they cataloged in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it would be in box 5, you know.
Like a certain.
Well, it's just a way to reference what they found. The greater information will be kept written, you know, down. But, you know, it's just cataloging. We don't do that like that. So anyway, you guys, stay dry, stay cool. See you on Tuesday. I'm sorry. Well, see, we don't. Yeah, see, like this is, yeah, this is somebody probably with status. And this was likely, this particular piece was likely like a death mask. And for important people, even, you know, all over the world, they've been doing that. You know, they've taken wax or a plaster cast of somebody who died, a death mask, and they memorialized them that way. And this is kind of one of those things that got seashells in for the eyes, and you know, a lot of this is broken off, but this is just really plastered right over the top of this guy's skull.
I would think, I would think they would be someone with status because at the time, like resources were important.
Absolutely. You just made my day. This is how we have to think about this stuff, is that it was important for them to do this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.